Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow. This is part 8 of the Cuffed universe. You can be looking forward to more parts coming soon. The rating on this fic is teen and up. The relationships are Virgil/Remus/Logan. Additional tags: Cop Remus, Criminal Logan, Morally Gray Logan Sanders, Kidnapping, Sexual Innuendo, Threats of Violence, Very Lightly Implied Past Sexual Assault. Summary: Virgil and Remus go on a reluctant road trip with Logan. Chapter 1. I'd just like you both to know that I blame you equally for my involvement in this, and I hate you both for it, Virgil hissed sullenly. He wasn't sure what response he was expecting at this point, to be perfectly honest. Perhaps some part of him still expected to eventually get a sincere apology if he kept complaining. He didn't even get a half-assed apology this time. Logan just hummed and continued to drive. I did nothing wrong, Remus insisted from the back. Virgil took a sullen sip of his coffee. His latest of a long string of jobs had been working at a Denny's, the night shift, unfortunately. He'd been taking out the garbage in the morning right before heading home, which was when he'd stumbled upon two idiots fighting in the parking lot. From what he'd discerned after the fact, Remus had managed to actually catch Logan for once a bit early, but Logan had managed to turn the tables. Now, Logan was driving Remus's car to an unknown destination for the past few hours. And of course, Virgil had the bad luck to witness the kidnapping and had to be dragged along. I still don't know how you drink that shit black, Remus groaned from the back seat as Virgil set down his coffee cup. Virgil flipped him off. Seriously, you'd need 5 tablespoons of sugar and a 1/4 cup of milk to make that even close to palatable for me. And whipped cream, Logan contributed. Yeah, Remus agreed, and whipped cream. See, Logan gets it. Also, speaking of the delicious white gunk, another sip of my iced hot chocolate, please. Why do you have to call it that? Virgil grumbled, even as he picked up the plastic cup and leaned into the back seat to let the handcuffed man take a drink. I can't believe I was dragged into this just to help Remus drink iced hot chocolate. I can't believe they can't figure out a better name for the drink, Logan said. The name is an oxymoron. Hey, are you calling me names? Remus asked around the drink straw. Logan frowned. No, he said. The meaning of the word... He's screwing with you, Logan. Virgil cut him off, hoping that he wouldn't have to listen to another etymology lecture. He knows what it means. Ah, Logan said. His eyes glanced to look at him in the rearview mirror. Remus was currently looking like more of an idiot than usual as he strained against the cuffs to lean forward and get his mouth around the offered drink straw. He seemed to bite back a smile before turning his attention back to the road. Remus, in a disgusting display, finished about 1/3 of the sickeningly sweet drink before finally drawing away with a pop. Virgil shoved the drink back into the cup holder to drink his own beverage at a more sedate pace. After a few minutes of driving, Logan spoke up again. We are about to leave the city, he said. Virgil, climb into the back seat and blindfold Remus and then yourself. Fuck you, was Virgil's immediate answer. Logan's fingers tapped the steering wheel impatiently. If I have to stop this car to do it myself, I will be very displeased. Oh, yeah? Virgil's mouth twisted up into a bitter sneer. What are you going to do then, Logan? He challenged. Hit me? Lock me in a dark room? Starve me? It probably wasn't the best idea to test the criminal that Virgil didn't really know despite living with him for years. He did not know what he was capable of, but at the same time he was fucking tired of this. Part of him just wanted Logan to actually snap so Virgil could stop looking at him and seeing Logan, the man who had been his friend and confidant for years, the man Virgil still found himself missing late at night when he was home alone, and the man who was a lie. It would be better for his mental health if when he looked him in the eyes he could just see the person he really was instead of the memory of the man he'd... Logan's eyes flickered to him coldly, and Virgil braced himself for whatever was going to come out of his mouth. If you do it, I'll cook homemade chicken parmesan when we get to my cabin. All right, Virgil said instantly. Fuck it, I'm coming back there, Remus. Is that all it takes? Betrayal! Remus, I fucking hate both of you. It's not a betrayal because I was never on your side. He kidnapped you. He also makes a mean chicken parmesan, Virgil said. Gosh, he'd missed Logan's food. He'd eaten way too much fast food since Logan had left. It was one safe thing to miss about the man. Remus whined pitifully as Virgil blindfolded him with the scarf Logan indicated. "You'd better at least have booze at this cabin of yours," Remus said. "We will have Merlot with the chicken Parmesan, of course," Logan said. "I'm not an animal." "Yes." He seemed satisfied enough with this answer to settle back against the seat. Virgil took the seat opposite him. "Do I really have to blindfold myself, too?" Virgil asked with a sigh. "Yes," Logan replied sternly. "It is only for 30 minutes. Virgil groaned, but he did put the blindfold on, folding his arms over his chest grumpily once finished. "Thank you, Virgil," Logan said. "Your compliance is appreciated." Virgil hissed in reply, and Logan chuckled lightly in response. Virgil went back to pouting. He was left alone with his thoughts then, without the ability to look at their surroundings. "I wonder if I've been fired from Denny's yet," he bemoaned after a few minutes. "I was supposed to be back an hour ago." "I do apologize for that," Logan said. "I am willing to compensate you for your time, and a little extra, to hold you over until you can find another paying job." Virgil scowled at the offer. "I don't want your crime money," he spat. "I'll only use money I made through guest lectures and fixing computers if you'd prefer. That's not how money works, and we both know it. It also wasn't the point. You can't just say you're giving me your not crime money when it's all in the same account." "You didn't mind me buying you coffee with my so-called crime money," he pointed out. "Well, that's because I've been kidnapped. I get to benefit from crime money when I've been kidnapped. It cancels out." "Or because he's using crime money to commit the crime of kidnapping, it's now double crime money," Remus said. "I can't see why restitutions for my kidnapping you don't fall under the same clause as the coffee," Logan said. "I concur," Remus cheerfully proclaimed. "Once again, I hate you both," Virgil said. Something poked Virgil in the side. He discerned it was Remus with his shoe, and Virgil blindly slapped at his calf as hard as he could. "Play nice," Logan scolded. "Or what?" Virgil asked. "If I strangle Remus, would you have to stop the car so I could try to run away?" "Because running did you so much good earlier," Remus muttered. "You are not in a position to be mocking me," Virgil said, reaching out and feeling for the handcuff chain. He jiggled it meaningfully. "I also have chicken nuggets in my freezer," Logan warned. Virgil huffed and leaned against the door. "Also put on your seatbelt, Virgil." "Yeah, Virgil," Remus said. "We wouldn't want Logan to get pulled over and have the officers realize he has unrestrained passenger in the back seat." "I'm going to gag you next time, Remus," Logan informed him offhandedly. "Sounds like a superb time." "Virgil," Logan said pleasantly, "you have permission to slap him." Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 2. "Are we there yet?" Remus complained. "As I said 2.5 minutes ago," Logan's voice gritted out from the driver's seat. Remus barely suppressed a smirk. He was starting to actually get to him, and it was wonderful. "Not yet." "And as I said 2.5 minutes ago," Remus sniffed. "It's not like I can see the clock to know that. Time moves slower when you can't see." "That is objectively false," Logan said. Remus whined dramatically and threw himself, the best he could in his current predicament, back against the seat. He bumped into Virgil, who hissed and tried to push him away. Logan's voice was back to its normal monotone sound when he spoke again. "Well, that wouldn't do. Figure out another solution to mark the passage of time," he said. "Oh, mistake." "Fine," Remus said. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. "Please let me strangle him, Logan," Virgil begged from beside him. "Please, I won't even try running away if you let me. He just needs to stop talking." 4 Mississippi. "Remus," Logan said. It sounded mostly calm, but Remus could hear his calm tone fraying around the edges. "That is not what I meant. Stop." "What are you gonna do, Mom? Turn the car around? 6 Mississippi, 7 Mississippi. He could almost feel Logan's agitation rolling off of him in waves as Remus steadfastly continued to count out the seconds. Virgil was also quite annoyed, clearly, but he was not Remus's focus. See, Logan was crafty, obviously, considering Remus was at his mercy and not for the first time. He was smart and calm, but Remus was starting to learn how to needle his way under the man's skin. An annoyed Logan was a distracted Logan. A distracted Logan might not be as careful as usual when they got to his destination. At around 210 Mississippi, what Remus deduced was Virgil's head started banging against his shoulder softly as he whispered, "Please shut up, please shut up, please shut up," to the same rhythm. At 456, Logan turned on the radio to try to drown him out, but Remus just started to sing the numbers along to the tune. At 740, Virgil started lightly kicking him for each number. At 872, Virgil stopped kicking him. At 423, Logan firmly told him to stop or he'd gag him. Remus commented, "Sexy." Both of his companions reacted in different ways, but both clearly did not approve of his statement. Despite the threat, Remus was not gagged. Finally, at 1273, the car started to slow. "God, please tell me that we're there," Virgil groaned, "or at least tell me we're stopping to throw him into a ditch." "We are here," Logan confirmed. "You may take your blindfold off now if you wish, Virgil." There was a rustle of fabric in response to his words. "Great," Virgil said after a moment. "Taken to a cabin in the woods by a known criminal. Just my luck." "Could you take my blindfold off?" Remus asked. "No. Suffer." Remus pouted in his general direction, and despite not being able to see, he could feel his scorn. "Please, Virgie," he begged. He lowered his voice a bit. "I'll make it worth your while." The answer to that offer was the sound of a car door opening and then slamming shut. He could hear Logan sigh, and then another door opened. Remus sat in silence for a few moments. It took longer than necessary. Logan was probably trying to cool off a bit before opening the door. No fair! Remus had worked hard for that man's frustration. Honestly, his throat was a little dry from all the counting. Finally, Remus heard the door next to him open. He turned his head and flashed a smile. Apparently, said smile irritated Logan because he said, "Do you have to be like this constantly?" "Oh, I'm sorry," Remus said sweetly. "Am I making my kidnapping unpleasant?" "You started it." Despite the bite of his words, his touch was rather gentle when he moved to take off the blindfold and started to remove some of the restraints. Neither of them was particularly scared to punch the other in the face. If Remus managed to even slightly get an advantage, they were going to be unrepentantly slamming each other into the dirt. But for now, Logan's fingers were soft and efficient, even though by the look in his eyes he wanted to slam Remus's face into the pavement again and again. "I didn't kidnap you," Remus pointed out. "I arrested you. They're very different things." "That depends on perspective," Logan grumbled, continuing to work on unbinding him. "Well, maybe you shouldn't have been hacking the FBI's computer system at a public library." "It's actually one of the best places to hack the FBI's system," he said, deliberately ignoring the lawlessness of his actions and focusing on the least important part of Remus's sentence. "It's much more difficult to track someone down when they aren't using a personal computer, and there are plenty of escape routes in a library." "Not enough escape routes," Remus taunted. Logan bristled. "You got lucky once. It won't happen again." "Are you sure about that?" Remus asked with a smile. He jerked forward when one of his hands was freed, trying to throw him off balance and grab the key, but Logan managed to step away quickly. They stared each other down for a couple seconds before Logan gave him a look with narrowed eyes. "Completely," he replied. "We'll see," Remus said. "I'm rather good." "I wouldn't be particularly arrogant considering your current predicament," Logan said, his head tilting just slightly to the left. "That's like asking a fish not to swim," Remus said. "A cheetah not to run. A bonobo not to fuck their way up the social hierarchy. Are you capable of behaving for any amount of time?" "Only when handcuffed," he winked. But then he blinked and looked at his still-bound wrist. To a bed." "That can be arranged," Logan said, so instantly and casually that Remus just about choked on thin air. "Oh my God," Virgil said from the other side of the car. "Oh my God, I hate this." "What?" Logan asked. Virgil made a wounded sound, and Logan seemed to mull it over. "I see," he said after a moment. "On second thought, you are sleeping on the couch now." "Oh, come on," Remus said. "You seemed so obliging only a few seconds ago. Surely we can come to some sort of arrangement. I'll be very good." Logan rolled his eyes. Please, I'll do anything to get out of these handcuffs. Logan stepped forward again then, careful to keep the keys out of reach of Remus's free arm. He leaned in, and Remus fluttered his eyelashes at him. No, Logan said, right in his face. It was worth a shot, Remus replied. Logan said, non-committally. He reached forward to untie him again, but was careful to keep his body tensed and his eyes on Remus enough that Remus didn't see any more good opportunities to fight. At least for now. Remus ended up with his hands handcuffed behind his back before he was pulled out of the back seat. He and Virgil were then directed into the cabin. It seemed like a pretty nice place, like it might be a family's summer place or something. Remus wondered idly if they were trespassing. The door opened into a living room with a large couch, a couple of chairs, and a fireplace, but no TV. He could see the kitchen through one of the doors. Virgil, take your shoes off so you don't track mud, Logan said. Virgil ignored him, continuing his trek into the room only to flop on the couch. Logan sighed and eyed Remus. Really? Remus asked. Logan gave him a look. Fine. He squirmed one foot and then the other out of his shoes. Once Logan was also in socks, he led him over to one of the chairs and pushed him to sit down on it. One of the cuffs came off, only to be attached to the armrest of the heavy chair a moment later. Remus eyed it. It would be a little hard to break without anyone noticing, but if Logan left him alone for any amount of time... Don't anticipate me allowing you time to get out of that, Logan said, as though reading his mind. He turned to face Virgil. Shoes, he demanded. Garlic bread, Virgil bargained. Yes, now shoes. Virgil bent down to untie his shoelaces and pulled them off, handing them to Logan, who set them by the door. Well then, he said, I guess I should get started cooking dinner. Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 3. Stop that, Logan said, trying to smack Virgil's hand away as it reached forward and stole a piece of broccoli from the cutting board. However, despite the fact that he hadn't been fast enough to get away from Logan in the Denny's parking lot, he was fast enough to dance out of Logan's reach now to pop the vegetable into his mouth. I haven't washed them yet. Oh, the horror, Virgil replied, mock-seriously. Logan whacked him with the dish towel in his hands. I will tie you down too if you're not careful, he warned. It was, of course, not a true threat. While he wasn't afraid to restrain Virgil, there was really no point. Logan knew enough about Virgil to know he would not try to run when he had no idea where he was, especially since he had to know by now Logan ultimately would not cause him harm. It would simply be a needless act. Besides, Virgil had expressed his discomfort with being restrained, and Logan did not enjoy causing him unneeded stress, no matter how much he was purposefully being an annoyance. It's not nearly as fun as it sounds, Remus contributed from the living room. Logan could see him from where he stood. He had his head thrown back dramatically on the chair. Now him? Logan had no remorse with regards to him. But can you steal me something too? I'm starving. You ate 3 cheeseburgers and fries for lunch, Logan reminded. I'm a growing boy. You're a 33-year-old man, Logan shot back. A growing 33-year-old man. Logan just shook his head and turned to Virgil. Here, he said. If you want to taste something and still be helpful, try this. Logan stirred the simmering marinara sauce and then held out the spoon towards Virgil. He leaned forward and poked his tongue out to lick a bit of the sauce from the spoon. Logan said as he pulled back. And for once he follows my instructions without complaint. Oh, I'm sorry, Virgil said. Have I been being too difficult? Maybe next time you shouldn't invite me on your little fun crime vacations. Might be better for both of our mental health. Logan frowned, turning to put the spoon back into the pan. He stared at the sauce as he stirred it. I am sorry, he said softly after a moment. Yeah, Virgil said, tone bitter. Whatever. There was a beat of awkward silence, broken only by the sound of a bubble on the surface of the sauce popping and splattering marinara on the otherwise pristine stove. Did it taste okay? Logan asked. It could do with a little less being held against my will, but other than that it's fine. Despite the jab, his tone had deflated a bit again. It was almost worse when he wasn't spitting mad, Logan noted. Does it need any more salt? To Logan's confusion, Virgil's face suddenly screwed up into a surprised smile, and he snorted out a laugh. "What?" Logan asked. "You—" He bent over slightly, leaning one hand against the counter and placing the other over his lips. "The best part is, you don't even know what you just said was a joke." Logan gave him another confused look. "I just asked if the dish needed more salt." Another laugh squeezed its way out of Virgil's mouth past his fingers. He slid to the floor to giggle. Logan watched him fold in on himself with bewildered affection. "Salty can be used as a slang term," Remus offered from the other room. Logan sighed. "Of course. I'll have to add it to the flashcard deck." Virgil looked up at him from the floor. "You still use the flashcards I made for you?" he asked. "I do, yes," Logan said. "I need to keep up with internet speak somehow. They're useful." Something unreadable crossed Virgil's face. "Useful," he repeated back blankly, and looked away. Logan blinked down at him, aware that he had just done something wrong, but wholly unsure what it could be. "Right." His empty tone reminded Logan uncomfortably of that distant one he'd take after a particularly bad day at the old call center. Logan had managed to fix that once, but he didn't know how to fix it this time. "I'm going to go set the table." "No knives," Logan said. "Uh-huh." He turned and walked away to start looking into different cabinets for the plates. "The one to the left," Logan offered. "Okay." Logan winced. He really didn't know what he'd done. Well, besides the obvious. Not that the obvious wasn't enough. He watched Virgil out of the corner of his eye as he grabbed the plates and cups and took them to the dining room. Remus said something to him, and it must have been particularly stupid because Virgil bopped him on the top of the head with the stack of plates. Whatever it was made Virgil smile, though, so that was good. He turned back to the dinner he was cooking. It had always been Virgil's favorite when they lived together. Logan quite liked it as well. It was one of the few recipes he remembered completely from his childhood, many of the others only partial, and not quite the same, or lost completely to time. Cooking it always made Logan feel strange, though not necessarily in a bad way. The fact that Virgil had chosen it as his favorite out of all the dishes Logan had made him over the years made him feel even stranger. He could hear Remus trying to convince Virgil to help him escape in the living room, mostly through blatant flirting. It did not seem to be working. "I can hear you," he reminded. "This is a private conversation," Remus shot back. "I'm your captor," Logan said with an eye roll. "Doesn't give you an excuse to be a rude eavesdropper." Was he trying to be as aggravating as possible? Yes, Logan reminded himself. Yes, he was. It was honestly a bit impressive, if aggravating, that Remus managed to get under his skin so easily. Logan was often good at ignoring such things, but Remus could make it difficult. He moved to start heating up a pan to fry the chicken in instead of engaging any more. He did his best to lose himself in the familiar action of cooking, but could not help but notice that Virgil did not come back into the kitchen to steal food or make conversation. Instead, he chose to stay in the living room with Remus, sitting on the couch with his legs curled up onto it. A little more than half an hour later, he finished up the dinner, complete with garlic bread and a side of roasted vegetables, and set everything on the table. He went over to get Remus from his chair and cuffed one of his hands to the table leg. "I'm going to keep one of your hands uncuffed so you can eat," Logan told him before leaning in close. "If you try to escape, I will be very displeased." Remus just looked at him for a long moment. "I know the feeling," he said lowly. "Fair warning, we are currently in the middle of the woods and you have no idea where. There are wolves." "Well, maybe the wolves should be afraid of me," Remus replied, not breaking eye contact. There was a beat of silence. "Can we just, eat dinner, please?" Virgil asked. They both glanced at Virgil, and then Logan leaned away, moving to take the seat across from Remus. He felt a pinch to his side when he turned, and jumped before whipping back around. "I can tie your hands behind your back and make you eat like an animal." Remus just gave him a big smile, looking very much like a big, dumb, unrepentant puppy. "Kinky." "Oh my God, stop!" Virgil groaned. "Not in front of my salad." "You don't have a salad, Virgil," Logan pointed out with a frown. "Do you want a salad? I believe I have some lettuce in the refrigerator." He just grumbled something and put his head in his hands. He doesn't want salad, Remus explained. Then why... Memes, Logan, Remus informed him. Logan sighed at Virgil. It is like you were speaking a different language half the time, he accused. Virgil just groaned into his hands. But a moment later his hand snuck out to grab a piece of garlic bread from the plate. Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 4. Dinner actually ended up not being too horrible overall, despite, the awkwardness of two of the three participants being prisoners, including Virgil. Okay, so it was a little horrible in that respect, but hostage or not, in the situation, the food was good. You could say a lot of things about Logan, but you could not say he was a bad cook. Virgil kept mostly to himself, distracting himself from the conversations that happened between Logan and Remus with pasta. Virgil knew at this point he wouldn't be able to keep track of most of their conversations. Most of what they talked about was past times they met, which, even if Virgil had happened to be there, Virgil hadn't really been a part of their escapades. He was more of a side character in their lives. He finally knew how the shopkeepers felt in video games when the main characters stumbled in, stole all their shit from the chests they could reach in their shops, and then expected to be sold a sword. Their conversations were always filled with in-jokes, allusions to past events, and, in Remus's case, subtle flirting that went over Logan's head 75% of the time. It could be entertaining to try to follow when Virgil was in the mood, but he was not in the mood today. It was surprising how well they knew each other, how easy it was for them to talk when they were enemies. But since they constantly seemed to be either working together in a temporary truce or keeping one another prisoner, they'd managed to strike some sort of weird camaraderie. Virgil wondered idly if Remus now knew Logan better than Virgil did, despite Virgil having lived with him for years. After all, what did Virgil know about Logan? Virgil focused hard on scooping up leftover marinara sauce with garlic bread. He at least knew Logan could cook. Logan's cell phone rang suddenly, and he glanced at it. I need to take this, he said, after reading what flashed across the screen. Virgil noticed Remus glancing over to look at the number. He was likely disappointed that instead of displaying a phone number to memorize, the number was saved under a contact that said, Contact A2. Logan spared a glance at Remus, reaching over to restrain the hand he had let remain free to eat despite Remus's pout. Stay, he said. Then he grabbed the phone and walked out of the front door, closing it firmly behind him. Hey, Virgil, Remus said as soon as the door clicked shut. No. Virgil did not take his eyes from his plate. Come on, Remus whined. Help a guy out. Why should I? He asked. I mean, Remus pointed out, technically, by not helping me, you're aiding and abetting a criminal. You know what? Virgil said. He fully contemplated laying his face in the leftover tomato sauce on his plate. Whatever. Go ahead and ruin my life more than you already have. Silence. Virgil wasn't much of a drinker. His parents had died in a car crash, not caused completely by, but not helped by the fact that his father had been tipsy, and Logan was aware of that fact, which is why Virgil had been offered water instead of wine when they'd sat down. Now, Virgil reached over a hand to grab Logan's recently topped-off wineglass from in front of his plate, and downed the whole thing in one go. Are you okay over there? Remus asked. Virgil slowly turned to face him. Remus had an easy smile on his face, but his eyes were sharp and tracking Virgil like he thought he might snap. Fair. Virgil threw one hand out, gesturing to the world around him. It was the only answer Remus was going to get to a stupid question like that. Fair enough, he said. Want to talk about it? What is there to talk about? Virgil asked. Remus just shrugged and looked down at his plate. He frowned at it, and his newly re-restrained hand. He leaned down and grabbed the end of a single noodle with his lips. He slurped it up with a noise that made Virgil's nose scrunch. So, he said, casually leaning back in his chair as though he did not have marinara sauce all over his face from where the noodle had slapped him on its way into his maw. How've you been? It shouldn't be endearing. It really shouldn't be, but the contradictory sight of his serious expression and the messy face from eating like an animal because he was too impatient to wait for the end of a phone call made Virgil want to laugh despite the fact that the world was crap. Fine, he said, and it wasn't exactly a lie. He was fine for the most part overall. He was constantly anxious about his financial situation, considering how often he'd been fired recently, but fine was relative, and he was in a much better place than he'd been during previous times in his life. He wasn't being crushed by his parents' debt, only working to support himself rather than fending off the ravenous debt collectors. During those frequent moments between jobs, he'd managed to get a bit of time to write. Somehow he'd managed to sell a couple of short stories. It wasn't much money, and it wasn't as consistent as an actual job would be, but it was something. Not only did it give him a bit of wiggle room with money, but it was also nice to learn that some people appreciated his work. He had his problems, but most of them weren't drowning him, except I moved. You did? Remus asked. He didn't sound surprised, and Virgil was 80% sure he already knew. He had liked to show up randomly at Virgil's old house sometimes to be a general nuisance. The great Detective Royal leaned his face over his plate and carefully brought his teeth down over an edge of one of the chicken cutlets there. He was lucky Logan had cooked the meat to make it very tender. He was actually able to bite off a chunk with that method. His chin still came back completely covered in sauce, though. Yeah. Why? The lease ended, and I can't afford it without a roommate, Virgil said. He took a sip of his water, trying to wash down the bitterness at the back of his tongue from the wine. Especially when your previous roommate was apparently paying more than their share before. Oh, Remus said knowingly, and he had no business having that compassionate look of understanding in his eyes, with a stray piece of spaghetti stuck in his mustache. That's why you're so grumpy today. I think that has more to do with the kidnapping, Virgil groused. Nah, Remus said. Virgil glared at him. The spaghetti noodle dropped off his face and back onto the plate. You're just pissed at Logan. He was, of course. He was pissed at Logan. Logan had apparently gone behind his back when they'd started renting the house and made a deal with the realtor. They'd silently charged Logan double as much as they did Virgil. Logan had also put all of the included utilities in his own name and hid the bills. And the thing was, Virgil had known something was off about it. But he'd made the mistake of trusting Logan not to lie to him. A ridiculous thing to trust, he now knew, but he hadn't then. And he just assumed he'd put his big brain to use to find the best possible deal for the two of them. But no, it had been an underhanded trick, just like everything. He'd have gotten into a screaming match with the bastard today if he still thought he had the right. As it was, the anger was left to curdle in his veins with no outlet. Fuck off, Virgil spat at Remus. It's none of your business. Remus carefully maneuvered a bite of garlic bread into his mouth with his tongue, and then sat up to chew it contemplatively. He didn't do it to piss you off, he commented. You don't know shit. Remus said nothing. He knew, Virgil couldn't help but say. He knew I didn't want him to do shit like that. I told him 1,000 times to keep his nose out of my finances, and he still went behind my back and did it anyway. It just made it clearer that he doesn't give a shit about me or what I want. Remus tilted his head a bit, staring him down. That's a weird conclusion to draw, he says. Did he pay it for things without you knowing because he doesn't care about you? No, it's not, Virgil insisted, crossing his arms. Remus shrugged. Seems like the opposite to me. He didn't want you to be stressed about bills anymore. Yeah, and what about what I wanted? Virgil bit out. I told him no. It wasn't any of his business. I'm not saying he was in the right, Remus said. I'm just saying he did it because he cares. No, Virgil said. He really doesn't. Remus rolled his eyes. You're both dense as hell, he muttered, and stubborn as fuck. He's shit at expressing his emotions, so he expresses affection through caretaking and gift-giving, and you freak out if someone tries to hand you a penny off the street because you think gifts of any monetary value put you in debt to the giver. I have no idea how the two of you managed to live together for so long, to be honest. Apparently mostly lies, Virgil groused. And that was the kicker, wasn't it? Virgil had loved him because he had always been straight with Virgil. He wasn't good at saying how he felt, but if Virgil asked for information, he'd give it to the best of his abilities. He'd tell Virgil outright if a habit annoyed him, so then Virgil hadn't had to worry he was doing something annoying without realizing it. He'd tell him when he was spiraling or blowing a problem out of proportion. He'd been a fucking pillar of rationality for Virgil, a godsend, a beacon of truth. He'd also been lying to Virgil the entire time he'd known him. It wasn't all a lie, Remus told him. He did actually care about you. You're the only one who's ever truly known him, I think. But I didn't, Virgil said. Not really. Are you sure? Remus asked, as the front door opened once again. Virgil didn't have a chance to answer as Logan returned and immediately started to fuss over a very food-covered Remus, telling him off for not being able to be patient for 5 seconds. Remus met his eyes as Logan reached down to unhandcuff one of his arms and shoved wet paper towels into his hand. Was he sure? Virgil didn't know anymore. Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 5. Why am I stuck with the couch? Remus whined, as obnoxiously as he possibly could. He was currently still handcuffed as he reclined on the cabin's old couch. It was, admittedly, a very comfortable couch, with plush cushions and a soft fabric covering it, but Remus still planned to complain as loudly as possible about the sleeping arrangements. Honestly, Logan asked, dropping a pillow on his face, and cutting off Remus's vision entirely for a moment. The pillow smelled of lavender laundry detergent, and Remus imagined the pillowcase he'd just watched Logan put on it was recently washed. Remus sat up slightly, so the pillow rolled down onto his stomach, allowing him to see once more. It was just Remus and Logan in the living room. Remus could still hear the shower running in the bathroom down the hall. Virgil had asked to take a shower since he'd been kidnapped straight from work and claimed to smell like grease. Remus didn't really need a shower, but he'd still asked for one. He'd been denied when he'd asked to be out of the cuffs to take one. He'd been double denied when he'd suggested he stay in the cuffs and Logan help him to get clean. Even though he didn't get a chance to escape, he did get a chance to see one of Logan's seemingly unamused, very amused glares. So the request had still been worth it. Yeah, honestly, Remus replied to Logan's question, while struggling to position the pillow behind his head with his hands still cuffed together. There are only 2 beds, so someone had to sleep on the couch. Considering I know for a fact you would immediately start making sexual innuendos if I handcuffed you to a bed, you deserve the couch. So I'm being punished for a crime I haven't even committed? Remus whined, outraged. Yes, Logan said simply, one eyebrow raised. I could make sexual innuendos about you handcuffing me to a couch, Remus pointed out. I'm not handcuffing you to the couch, Logan pointed out, while walking over to the wall where a chain was waiting. I'm handcuffing you to 2 chains attached to opposite walls. You would immediately escape if I handcuffed you to only the couch and left you alone for more than half of a second. Logan was, of course, correct. If you're worried about leaving me alone, we could share a bed, Remus suggested, waggling his eyebrows, as Logan hooked the chain he'd just brought over to Remus's handcuffed hands. He'd been kind enough to handcuff them in front of Remus for the night. You could sleep on the floor, Logan returned with a bland expression. Well, that wouldn't do. Just chain me to the foot of your bed, give me a collar, and call me Puppy. Logan's nose scrunched up in an expression somewhere between amusement and disgust. Do you ever stop? Not sure, babe, Remus said with a wink. You want to find out? This is why you're sleeping on the couch, Logan said with a shake of his head, moving to grab the chain attached to the opposite wall. Please, Remus said with his best begging face when Logan came over to him holding to the chain. No. His handcuffs were then attached to that chain as well, giving Remus about a foot of slack in the chains. You could at least have left the lamp within reach, Remus said. I'm not a fan of blunt force trauma, Logan said dryly. I just wanted to be able to read after lights out, Remus claimed, batting his eyelashes. Read by the moonlight, Logan said, not bothering to point out that Remus had no books, and Logan would probably not be giving him one for the same reason Remus wasn't allowed lamp privileges. But the moonlight can't be used as an improvised weapon, Remus said with a pout. That managed to get a laugh out of Logan. His expression gentled minutely. Would you like a glass of water? In a glass, or plastic? Darn, Remus said, but then shrugged. Yeah, sure. I'll be back in a moment. Logan ducked into the kitchen, and Remus could hear the tap running a few moments later. Remus noticed that the shower down the hall had stopped. Logan re-entered the living room with a plastic cup, which he set on the ground just in Remus's reach. Thanks, Remus said. No problem. So, Remus said, glancing up at him, how long are you keeping me? Or planning to keep me, at least? Logan raised an eyebrow at the implication that Remus would be able to escape him, the bastard, but still answered the question. I have an appointment tomorrow that I must attend. After that, I can take you home. So just a quick weekend getaway to the middle of the woods for us, Remus said. It's Wednesday. A midweek getaway, then. No wonder the trip is cheap. Though to be honest, I was assuming that had more to do with the ghastly accommodations. He shook his arms, making the chains attached to them rattle. I could take away the water, Logan said mildly. You wouldn't, though, Remus replied flippantly. Remus was rewarded with an eye roll. Logan did not move to take the water away. The bathroom door down the hall opened to let Virgil slip into the hallway with wet hair. He was wearing a hoodie he'd borrowed from Logan and his own boxers. He glanced up at them briefly and then disappeared into his room without saying a word. You should try to talk to him, Remus said once Virgil was gone. Logan didn't respond. Logan did this thing when he was nervous or unsure about something where he'd run his right thumb across the side of his right middle finger. It would travel back and forth between the first and second knuckle. It was such a subtle tell that very few people would notice it, but Remus had. Once, and exactly once, Remus had had the opportunity to touch his hand there. There was a small, almost invisible scar on that finger, a patch of slightly raised, rougher skin that could only really be noticed by touch. Currently, Logan was running his thumb across that scar while he stared forlornly at the hastily closed bedroom door. They were both so fucking stupid. Virgil's easy, Remus said. You literally just have to have one honest conversation with him and you'll be golden. It's not easy, Logan argued back. It's complicated. It wouldn't have to be if the two of you just talked, Remus said. I very much doubt he'd like to talk to me tonight. No, you don't want to talk to him, Remus argued. You don't want to face that your actions hurt him. But newsflash, not explaining why you lied is just hurting him more. Logan paused for a long moment. Sleep well, Remus, he said, before walking toward the bedroom Virgil had not gone into. He switched off the living room lights as he went. Remus sighed, staring at the ceiling as his eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. They were hopeless. Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 6. Logan had never been particularly good at falling asleep. His father had always told him it was because he was too smart. He remembered long nights of frustration where his body was exhausted but he couldn't get to sleep. Often he spent this time in the living room, and even though his father never had any issues with sleep himself, he'd always stayed up with Logan. Logan had many fond memories of late-night snacks and warm tea or milk with his father, even though he'd often felt guilty for keeping him awake, since the man had to open the flower shop early in the mornings. Sometimes a full belly and a gentle story from his father had helped him finally get to sleep, and sometimes it didn't, but he'd appreciated it either way. They talked to doctors about the issue, but the bouts of insomnia were inconsistent, and no proposed solution had seemed to help. His father had come to the conclusion that his brain had too many thoughts, and so it took longer than it did for most people for him to shut everything down at night. That seemed to be close enough to the truth for Logan. In his youth he would often find his brain writing essays on philosophy, or imagining science experiments when he should have been calming down to sleep. He'd never been able to help it. Nowadays his mind would often turn toward obsessing over his goals, though every so often the more frivolous pursuits of his youth still invaded his head and kept him awake. There never were tea and cookies and stories any more, however. Just Logan, in a bed alone, staring at the ceiling. Tonight he was again unable to go to sleep, though this was not for the usual reasons. This reason was much less about his thoughts, and much more about his emotions. It was 2 a.m. He had attempted to retire to sleep at 10 p.m., but his efforts were for naught. He found himself quite haunted by his own roving thoughts and feelings every time he closed his eyes. This was why he was awake to hear the footsteps in the hall. A part of him groaned, expecting this to be an escape attempt, though the footsteps were not from the living room, and so were likely Virgil's and not Remus's. Logan honestly didn't expect Virgil to attempt escape, at least not in the middle of the night. And, in fact, Logan ended up being proven correct, as the footsteps stopped outside his door instead of continuing toward the front door. There was a long moment of hesitation, and Logan held his breath. Then the door cracked open slightly. "You're awake," Virgil said. The soft words were somewhere between a question and a statement. The way he'd said it seemed to imply he'd been anticipating Logan still being awake. "Yes," Logan confirmed. He wondered what Virgil could see of him from the hallway. It was quite dark in Logan's room. Virgil himself was illuminated by the light in the hallway, but most of his face was still in shadows, hiding Virgil's expression. The door slowly creaked open further, allowing more of the hallway light to spill into Logan's bedroom briefly. Yet then that light was abruptly cut off as Virgil stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Did you need something?" Logan asked, watching the dark blob near the door that was Virgil. "I was just wondering if you were awake," Virgil said, sounding as exhausted as Logan currently felt. That, Logan thought, was not at all an adequate explanation as to what Virgil was doing here. Why had he wondered if Logan was awake? Why had that urged him to come to Logan's room? "I am," Logan replied simply. "I thought I could hear you thinking through the walls," Virgil said. Logan could just barely make out the sight of Virgil pushing his hair out of his face. Wondered if my Logan senses still worked. Logan had no response for that, and they were silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry if I offended you earlier tonight." Logan finally broke the silence. "Offended?" Virgil scoffed. Logan did not know why he sounded offended that Logan had said he was offended. "You don't even know why I got upset, do you?" Logan was unsure if he was expected to lie in response to that. "Well," Logan said cautiously, "no." Virgil sighed, and Logan heard footsteps as Virgil moved closer to the bed. "Well, why shouldn't I be upset?" he asked, sounding perhaps slightly bitter. "Have you given me any reason not to be?" "No," Logan replied, closing his eyes so he couldn't even see the visage of Virgil standing over him. He heard a heavy sigh from above him, and then quite suddenly warm weight descended on top of Logan. Logan found his eyes opening once again as he blinked dumbly at the ceiling through strands of dark hair in his face. "Virgil?" Logan asked. "Shut up," Virgil replied, nuzzling his face into Logan's neck. Logan did shut up. He placed his hand on the other man's back with the lightest of pressure, so Virgil didn't feel trapped, and then let himself relax under the warm weight. They stayed that way for quite a while, Virgil's breath puffing against his neck, and Logan all but limp under him. Then Virgil's head moved just slightly to the left, and they were kissing. It was not the first time they'd kissed, though their physical relationship had never escalated beyond that. It was, however, the first time they'd kissed since Virgil had learned what Logan really was. It surprised Logan that little had changed. The press of his lips was still just as soft and careful as it had been the first time they'd kissed, in the old, smelly apartment they'd once shared. His movements were always cautious, like he felt he might break Logan if he was anything other than gentle. He was probably right. Logan hadn't thought Virgil would be willing to kiss him at all after everything, but if he had entertained the idea, he'd have expected there to be a new harshness to it. Hate sex was a thing, after all, according to media at least. He'd have expected the desire to punish Logan for his transgressions to in some way color any sexual contact they might have. But there was none of that in this kiss. Logan's hand slid from Virgil's back to grip softly at the fabric of his shirt near his shoulders. Its other hand remained awkwardly limp on the bed next to them. Virgil drew back after a moment, his breath fanning over Logan's nose as he looked him in the eyes briefly. Logan's grip on Virgil's shirt tightened, and Virgil seemed to take that as a cue to continue. The second kiss was just as achingly gentle as the one that had come before, and Logan could not understand why. This was a gift of affection that Logan did not understand, and certainly didn't deserve. Logan's unoccupied hands hesitantly started to move, resting on Virgil's hip at first, and then slowly sliding around toward the front. Virgil pulled back instantly. "I'm not asking for sex," he said, batting the hand away. "It's not what this is." It never had been. Logan had sometimes wondered if he'd someday want it to be, but most of the time he'd been relieved about that fact. Now he still felt relieved, but it was also frustrating, as he gave him no answers. "Then what is it, Virgil?" he asked. Virgil sighed. "We don't need to talk about it." "I've kidnapped you," Logan reminded. "Handcuffed you to heavy objects and gotten you fired from jobs. Technically, at this very moment, you are my prisoner. So what is this?" Virgil groaned, pressing his forehead to Logan's. "That's talking about it," he grumbled. Maybe they should talk about it, Logan thought. His mind couldn't help but return to the conversation he'd had with Remus hours ago. Yet this was the one area of his life Logan had always been cowardly in. He said nothing. Upon realizing Logan had willingly given in to his demands to shut up, Virgil kissed him again briefly, before tucking his face into Logan's neck and moving to card his fingers lazily through his hair. It was only a matter of moments before Logan felt his eyes flutter shut, the soothing feeling of having someone there and kind quickly lulling him to sleep. Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 7. Virgil was woken by an alarm sound that he instantly knew he had not set, since it was the panic-inducing classic alarm clock sound that he despised. He shot straight up in bed, panic singeing through his veins, as he was certain he hadn't remembered to do his math homework the night before. "Ow!" said a voice from below him. Virgil blinked down to see Logan, and see that he was supporting his entire body weight by a hand on Logan's chest. What was Logan doing here? Did Logan help him do his homework? Logan was sometimes a teacher, so he'd be good at that. Wait, why was Logan a teacher if Virgil was a high school student? They kissed sometimes. That was weird. Logan gently shoved Virgil off of him onto the other side of the bed. Virgil watched him rub at his chest with a glower on his face. "Half asleep he was a threat to society," he grumbled. Virgil just blinked at him as Logan reached over to grab his phone and turn off the alarm. Reality slowly came back to Virgil as the room descended into silence. Virgil groaned and moved to press his face into one of the pillows. After a moment he felt a hand trail gently up his back. "Are you going back to sleep?" Logan asked. "No," Virgil said into the pillow. "Are you quite certain?" Logan asked, his tone warmly amused. "You may if you like." "You're getting up," Virgil pointed out. "Yes, but I have things to do this morning. You, however, have the option to sleep in." He drew a soft circle on Virgil's back, so light that Virgil could barely feel it through his thick hoodie. "Well, maybe I'd have something to do if I wasn't currently being held hostage. Consistent kidnappings make planning social events difficult." "Sorry," was the immediate reply, but after a pause Logan continued. "Do you enjoy partaking in social activities now?" His tone was skeptical enough that if Virgil wasn't extremely self-aware he'd have been insulted. "No," Virgil said, "but it's the principle." "I see," Logan said. Virgil expected him to get out of bed then to start his day. It wasn't the first time Virgil and Logan had shared a bed, after all, and Virgil knew his morning routine. Once the alarm went off, Logan wasn't one to stay lazing around in bed. He was always up and ready to start the day the second he opened his eyes. There had never been any early morning cuddles while they both tried to convince each other to get out of bed and stay in bed at the same time. Virgil was lucky if he didn't get ice water poured over him half the time because Logan wanted to make the bed on schedule. Yet today he didn't get up immediately. He just kept rubbing gentle circles on Virgil's back, and Virgil continued to lay there, unwilling to be the one to interrupt this brief moment of peace between them. "I've started writing again," Virgil blurted without quite meaning to. "Have you?" Logan asked, voice interested. A few short stories," Virgil replied, already feeling bashful about it. He never spoke about his writing with anyone. Even with Logan, he'd only barely mentioned it as a hobby, and it had been during a time in his life where he'd rarely had time to partake in it. "That's nice, Virgil," Logan said, sounding genuine. "I want to write a novel," Virgil said. "Do you?" "Yeah," Virgil confirmed. "If I ever find the time." "I'm sure it would be good." "You've never seen any of my writing," Virgil pointed out. "No," Logan agreed, "but I've heard you speak. You're a good storyteller. What would it be about?" "I don't know," Virgil said. Logan's hand paused on his back. "You don't?" he asked skeptically, because he knew Virgil enough to know he'd lie about that. Virgil sighed. "It would be about flowers," he said. "Flowers?" Logan prompted. "It'd be about a little orphan boy whose job it is to pick flowers for people around the village. He picks flowers for the apothecary and the soap maker and even the baker sometimes when he wants to make lavender scones. One day he picks a magical flower that belonged to a mythical creature. Not quite a fae, but something like that. I haven't decided exactly. Then he gets swept away to a new world where he has to battle monsters." "An interesting concept," Logan said. "Yeah," Virgil said, feeling awkward once again. It wasn't really, he knew. At least not the way Virgil had just explained it. This whole situation was awkward. "We should, probably get up soon," Virgil said. "We should," Logan confirmed. And yet, they didn't. They continued to lay there in that strange peace for a few more minutes before Logan's alarm went off once more, to Virgil's surprise. Virgil didn't even know he set a backup alarm. Only then did Logan finally pop up out of bed like he normally did. "I'll make breakfast," Logan said, looking back at him briefly. Virgil nodded, heart in his throat. He said, "is there a change of clothes for me somewhere?" "There should be something near enough to your size in the closet of the bedroom you were in originally." "Cool," Virgil said. At the confirmation he'd understood, Logan quickly slipped out of the bedroom door. Virgil gave himself a moment to stare vacantly at the ceiling before forcing himself to roll out of the bed they'd shared. He shuffled back to the bedroom he'd attempted to fall asleep in the night before. He stepped over the twisted mess of sheets lying on the floor to get to the closet. It was easy to find something to change into. The clothes he found were basics, t-shirts and jeans mostly. However, there were a few pieces that seemed almost tailored to Virgil's taste. The Green Day hoodie in particular made him pause. He wondered briefly if Logan had had Virgil in mind when he bought some of this clothing, either because he thought Virgil might end up here needing clothes, or just because they reminded him of Virgil. Either way, Virgil was here now, and he wasn't going to say no to a good hoodie. He snagged it, as well as some tastefully ripped jeans. There was even some underwear, still in its packaging, thankfully, for him to grab. He dressed swiftly before heading back into the hall and toward the kitchen. Remus was still restrained to the couch as he had been the night before. His head still lay on the pillow he'd been given, but he was awake. He raised an eyebrow at Virgil when he entered the room. "What?" Virgil asked, trying not to shift uncomfortably. "Oh, nothing," Remus sang, in a tone that clearly meant there was something. Virgil could keep his feet from shuffling, but he could not keep his face from warming. Instead of engaging, he turned to walk past him and join Logan in the kitchen. "It's just," Remus said as he passed, ignoring the fact that Virgil was ignoring him. "I'm not sure why I had to sleep on the couch when only one bed was going to be used anyway." Virgil flipped up his hood and continued his shuffle into the kitchen. "Enough," Logan said, in a warning tone from his place near the refrigerator. "Not that I blame you," Remus continued unbidden. Virgil went directly to the sink to get himself a glass of water. "It's just that I'm a little sad you didn't think to include me, or at least let me listen from the room next door. I'm not usually into that sort of thing, but I could have made an exception for one night." "So I'm making breakfast for two, then?" Logan asked, turning to meet Virgil's eyes, though his words were clearly more for Remus than Virgil. Virgil nodded, taking a swig of water. "This entire vacation has been a true injustice," Remus complained. "You might as well starve me too." "Okay," Logan said. He grabbed the last of what he was getting from the fridge and shut the door. Is bacon okay for omelets? I want sausage, Remus contributed from the couch. Then it's a good thing I'm starving you, Logan shot back. Bacon is fine, Virgil said. Virgil snooped through the cupboards as Logan cooked the omelets. 3, despite what he'd said to Remus, though he really did not make any sausage ones. He found fancy coffee and a French press instead of a standard coffee maker. Virgil rolled his eyes, but was happy that Logan had that at least, and not one of those old-style coffee siphons he liked to mess around with. Virgil had never managed to figure out how to use the things. Why would he want to do a fucking chemistry experiment before his caffeine, Logan? An awkward silence descended upon the kitchen now that Virgil and Logan were focused on their tasks. Or, at least, it would have been silent if not for the peanut gallery chattering away about everything and nothing from the living room. Virgil was glad for the white noise. If it wasn't for Remus's babble, he would have been fit to burst by the time that Logan finished nonchalantly cooking breakfast, as though nothing had happened the night before or this morning. Virgil timed the coffee just right, so it was done right when Logan finished the last of the omelets. They ended up eating in the living room instead of at the dining room table, so Logan just had to unchain one of Remus's hands to let him eat, and not bother with moving him. Virgil ended up sitting on the couch next to him, while Logan sat in a nearby armchair. I do have to go to a meeting, Logan said apologetically when they were almost done with breakfast. Virgil immediately pursed his lips. I am sorry, Logan said. I will only be gone for 4 hours, and then I will take you home as soon as I am finished. You should be home this evening. Virgil knew that meant he planned to be back in a good bit less than 3 hours, but knew Virgil would freak out if he was even slightly late, and so was hedging his bets. Whatever, Virgil said, looking away. Logan cleared the plates and then handcuffed Virgil to the armchair he'd eaten breakfast in. He gave Virgil the television remote and a watch. 4 hours, he promised. He was gone quickly after that, though Virgil was sure it had little to do with his normal efficiency, and more to do with the uncomfortable tension in the room Virgil himself wished he could escape. Too bad he was handcuffed to a chair. Hey, Virgil, Remus said, a bit more than 10 minutes after Logan was gone. Want to throw me that remote? Virgil sighed, knowing exactly what that look in his eyes meant. How he planned to get out of handcuffs with a television remote, Virgil did not know. He tossed him the remote anyway. Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 8. Do you even have a plan? Asked Virgil, his arms folded over his chest as Remus dug through the kitchen drawers for an adequate weapon and any other supplies he could find. Unfortunately for him, Logan had clearly locked away all of the dangerous kitchen objects somewhere. Remus could probably find them eventually, but it wasn't worth the time. Instead, he ended up palming a heavy flashlight he could use as a blunt weapon, a paperclip, and a fork. What are you going to do with that? Virgil asked, his nose all scrunched up. I'm very inventive, Remus said with a wink. I don't want to know, Virgil said, waving him off. In fact, I don't want to be a part of this at all. Can you just drop me off in a town with a bus station before going after Logan? You sure you don't want to see any of the action? No, Virgil replied firmly. Really? Because last night I would have loved to have seen the... Shut up, Virgil snapped. You're the one who wanted us to talk. Talk, said Remus, not fuck. We didn't, Virgil protested. Remus turned to him with an eyebrow raised. We don't do that. Never have. Oh, really? Remus questioned. His hand was still in the cupboard below the sink, hoping to find that Logan had carelessly left something in the less used space, but his eyes wandered over Virgil. Virgil couldn't seem to stop shifting his weight, and he wouldn't meet Remus's eyes, but at the same time there was a certain tension in his jaw that implied a little bit of indignation with the embarrassment. His arms were crossed like he was annoyed, but he was also squeezing himself in what was likely a self-soothing gesture. Remus had to consider the fact that he wasn't lying. Why not? Remus asked. It's none of your business. Virgil's tone was sharp, defensive. Remus tilted his head at him, and barely managed to avoid smacking it against the top of the cabinet. After a moment of just staring at Virgil, he shook his head, returning to his search. Fools, he thought, both of them. Back to your plan, Virgil said. How are we getting out of here? Remus glanced up at him and grinned. Logan, always has a backup plan, he said confidently. Sometimes this is to his detriment. Virgil raised a skeptical eyebrow. Sometimes it's to my detriment, Remus conceded, but recently I've been getting better at taking advantage without screwing myself. Remind me to stay 10 feet away when you do whatever you're doing, Virgil said. Remus stood up after his fruitless search of the cabinet. The flashlight and fork would have to do. They were on limited time. He strode over to the door in the kitchen he hadn't seen used yet. Where are you going? Virgil asked, following him. Though amusingly, he did stick to his 10 feet away rule as he did. Logan didn't park in the garage yesterday, Remus said, scrutinizing the door for any obvious booby traps. So, Remus said. He checked the door and found it was locked as expected. Luckily, it looked like a standard household door lock. He grabbed the paperclip out of his pocket. He almost certainly has an emergency car stashed here. The door popped open under his hand, leading to a musky garage with a giant tarp-covered object in the center of it. Remus walked forward and pulled off the tarp to reveal a Camaro. Nice, Remus said appreciatively. Now we just need to hotwire it, and we'll be on our way. Don't bother, Virgil said. What? Remus blinked over at the man still lingering in the doorway to the kitchen. He keeps his spare hidden in a box behind the license plate, Virgil replied with a shrug. Really? Remus asked, already rounding the car before Virgil could answer. He bent down and felt around the license plate. As promised, his hand hit something box-shaped. Oh, Virgil, we should team up more often. No, Virgil replied. Remus's fingers fumbled for the small latch until a key fell out, clinking against the floor. That's going to take a good 10 minutes off our time. You're welcome, Virgil said. How could I ever repay you? Remus asked, fluttering his eyelashes, still on his knees behind the car. You can repay me by getting me the fuck out of here, Virgil said blandly. He crossed over to the passenger side door and pulled it open. Remus cheerfully strode over to the driver's side door and slid inside. He put a key in the ignition and then paused. Ow, Remus said with a wince. What? Virgil asked. You don't possibly know how to drive stick, do you? Virgil looked at him for a solid 3 seconds. You have got to be kidding me. You can't drive a stick? And Logan must know it too, the cagey bastard, trying to Remus-proof his escape vehicle. He smacked a hand against the steering wheel and accidentally honked the horn, making Virgil jump. You can undo handcuffs with a screw from a remote control, but you can't drive a manual transmission car? Hey, driver's ed doesn't teach it anymore, and I don't know anyone who could teach me. Where was I supposed to learn? Can you even drive one? Of course I can, Virgil said. The only car I've ever owned was manual. Well, guess you're driving then. Virgil looked at him and groaned. I just want to bus out of here. Please, Remus asked sweetly. Virgil sighed. So much for not getting mixed up in your and Logan's bullshit, he muttered, shoving his door back open and exiting the car. They swapped places, Remus slipping into the passenger seat as Virgil started the car. The garage door opened with the click of a button. Virgil was, as it turned out, pretty good at driving. It honestly surprised Remus as he'd never seen the man drive before. Of course, the man was a ball of anxiety, so him being a safe driver did make sense. Where are we going? Virgil asked once they were on the road. There was only one road, really a long driveway, leading to the cabin, but it was a good question that would surely be relevant soon. Remus shrugged. I don't know yet. You don't know? Virgil said, glancing at him. Where am I driving? Just, Remus waved him off. Drive. Just drive, he says, Virgil muttered darkly. He can't even drive a stick shift and he doesn't even know where we're going. Oh, hush you, Remus said. He was digging through the glove box. Are you this picky in the sack, too? Because if so, that's good to know. Shut the fuck up. With the timeline Logan gave us, he had to have just gone to the nearest town, Remus said. He found the atlas stored in the glove box and started flipping through it. We just need to figure out where we are. We were blindfolded when we got here, Virgil reminded him. How are you going to figure that out? Oh, I am very skilled, especially when blindfolded, Remus said, scanning the map. Ugh. Now, we're looking for a wooded area, Remus mumbled to himself. We were blindfolded in St. Louis, and considering how long we drove after that, and the fact that I could tell we were facing the sun until that hard left... He frowned and drew his hand down a few highways. "We're going to Edwardsville," Remus said. "You'll eventually go right." He bit his tongue and squinted at the atlas. "Probably." "Probably, he says," Virgil scoffed. "You're very touchy today," Remus noted. "I wonder why," Virgil hissed back. But when they came to a fork in the road he turned right, like Remus had said. They were on a small backroads highway then, but at least it had signs. It only took a few miles of driving before seeing a sign that declared Edwardsville was only 6 miles east. Virgil did not compliment Remus's skills with geolocation. Edwardsville ended up being a smaller, but not tiny, town. Judging by the fact it was the only town nearby labeled on the map and it had a courthouse, it was the county capital for a county filled with even smaller towns. "Now what?" Virgil said. "Just drive around for a bit," Remus requested. "Oh yeah, driving aimlessly. Exactly what I wanted to do today." "It won't be that hard to spot his car," Remus said. "The town's not that big. Stay near the city center for now. He probably wouldn't have gone to a residential area, but we'll try that if we can't spot it." They drove around for maybe 15 minutes before spotting a familiar car in a grocery store parking lot. Remus had Virgil park a few rows away from it. "Okay," Virgil said, looking at the empty car. "What now?" Remus looked around himself with a hum. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "The park's our best bet." "Your best bet?" "Logan's probably meeting up with someone. If he was just picking something up, it wouldn't have been time sensitive. I doubt he wants to meet whoever it is in the market, so he's likely in the park." He nodded at the park across the street. Remus was already out of the car by the time he finished speaking. He smiled at Virgil, who was still sitting in the running car. "Want to come?" "No," Virgil replied. "You'll be lucky if I don't drive off without you." "You wouldn't do that to me," Remus said, with his most charming smile. Virgil glowered at him. "Go." Remus rolled his eyes, but shut the door and turned to head toward the park. It was a nice park, and not that big. If it wasn't a school day, he'd expect a lot of little kids to be running around it. However, today it was mostly empty. Between the size of the park and the lack of people, finding Logan wasn't too difficult. He was sitting on a bench in the park, casual with his legs crossed. He was clearly waiting for someone. Remus approached the man on the bench casually enough that a passerby wouldn't expect that they even knew each other, let alone that Remus was approaching Logan. He was close enough that he saw the moment Logan caught sight of him. Logan's eyes widened fractionally, which was more panic than he usually let himself display. He glanced in the direction opposite from where Remus was approaching, but he didn't look like he was planning on making a run for it. "Truce," he requested, before Remus could even make it to him. "Truce?" Remus asked, stopping with an eyebrow raise. "After all of that?" "This is important," Logan stressed. Remus took a moment to consider it. Perhaps he should have thought Logan was lying. He was a well-known liar and a criminal after all. Yet truces were a well-established thing between them at this point. Neither had ever abused one, and they felt almost sacred to Remus. Remus would never ask for a truce when it wasn't truly necessary. He couldn't help but think it was the same for Logan. And if he was requesting a truce, this must be important. Really important. "Fine," Remus said, "but you owe me." "Yes, fine," Logan said. He glanced in the same direction he had before. "Now get out of sight, now." There were no good places to hide nearby, but Remus was nothing if not adaptable and unafraid of getting a little dirty. He dove into a nearby trash can. "Disgusting," he heard Logan's voice idly say. Remus just knocked twice on the inside of the trash can in reply. Logan did not speak again after that. Remus spent almost 10 minutes in the trash can before something finally happened. He heard the footsteps first. Though the acoustics of his trash can were horrible, he was fairly certain that the footsteps were coming from the direction Logan had been looking. The footsteps stopped a few feet away. "Mr. Nightingale?" an unfamiliar deep voice asked. The tone was clipped, but wavered just a bit at the end. "Indeed," Logan said. "All cool criminal." There was no hint in his tone that a federal agent was currently hiding in a trash can feet away. There was a slight pause before he continued speaking. "This isn't a setup if that's what you're worried about. No cops. Just like I promised. Well," he clicked his tongue, "assuming you turned in your registration this morning as instructed." "I did," the man gritted out, sounding like someone was stepping on his foot to make him say so. "My entire career down the drain." "Perhaps you should have kept your sticky fingers out of the evidence holdings," Logan said coolly. "Now the files." Remus heard the sound of papers as they were handed over. "That's everything," the not cop said. Remus could hear paper flipping as he imagined Logan looking through them to make sure they were what he wanted. "Thank you, Mr. Wentley," Logan said when he was done. "Good luck in your new career." Remus could almost hear the look that was surely on Mr. Wentley's face, but he said nothing more. It was a short meeting, despite its apparent importance. Remus heard his clipped footsteps fading away a moment later. He waited until Logan gave him the all-clear before popping his head out of the trash can. "What was that about?" asked Remus. "None of your business," Logan replied curtly. Remus raised an eyebrow, leaning his arms on the rim of the trash can. "I allowed you a truce, so I actually think it is my business." Logan pursed his lips, clearly not happy that Remus was 100% correct. He shifted and drew one of the vials out of the large stack in his arms. "You get one of them," he said, "for your willingness to not interfere. Get out of the trash can first." Remus obliged, pushing himself up by the arm so he could slink out of the trash can. He dusted off his hands before giving grabby hand to the folder. Logan rolled his eyes but handed it over. "Files on a police officer?" Remus asked upon first glance. It wasn't particularly a surprise considering he'd gotten it from an ex-police officer, but Remus still wondered why. "On a very specific type of police officer," Logan drawled. Remus glanced up from the file at him. "A corrupt police officer, then?" "There's certainly a whole lot of them out there," said Logan. "Mr. Wentley himself is just corrupt enough to be blackmailed, but not corrupt enough that I can't justify letting him go free. He's been useful. His crimes only included stealing a bit from the evidence lockers, and he's easier to get at than the ones who have done a lot worse but have a lot more protection." Remus hummed and flipped through the file briefly. The police officer's name was Rich Stewart, 45 years old, and a Missouri State police officer. The first few files on him were pretty standard for an officer. There was a few disciplinary reports, but not for anything serious. It wasn't until Remus had flipped through maybe 10 pages that things started to get interesting. Photos, records that had somehow escaped the incinerator they were 100% meant to go to, and a very incriminating handwritten note that Remus would bet was in Rich Stewart's handwriting. It painted a very sordid picture of drugs being supplied by evidence lockups, a couple of people in a holding cell mysteriously dying, and some evidence of involvement with human trafficking. Remus had to do a double take at one of the photos of Rich Stewart. He realized he recognized another man in the back of the picture. "Little Mammoth," Remus said. "Good eye," Logan said. He sounded impressed. "Stewart works for the Cutler mob?" Remus asked. "Like I said, I'm willing to let Wentley go," Logan replied. He stood and picked up his stack of files before turning to head in the direction of the parking lot. Remus fell into step beside him. "What are you planning to do with those?" he asked. "Climb up the ladder," Logan said. Remus blinked at him. "You're going to try to take on Little Mammoth?" Remus reached out a hand to stop him. "Logan," he said, "that's dangerous." Logan glanced at the hand on his shoulder and then into Remus's eyes. "I know," he said, "but I already have a target on my back from Little Mammoth. Might as well try to take him out first." "What?" Remus asked, alarmed. "Why do you have a target on your back?" Logan reached up to adjust his glasses. "What do you think happened to Big Mammoth?" That caused Remus to freeze. Logan shrugged his hand off as he was rebooting. "What?" Remus had to jog to keep up with him. "I believe that's the end of our truce, Officer Royal," Logan said calmly. His tone left no room for argument, and Remus gnashed his teeth in frustration. But before he could argue more anyway, he glanced at the parking lot and realized something was missing. "Fuck," Remus said. "What?" Logan asked. "I think Virgil actually did drive away and leave me." Logan glanced at the parking lot and then back at Remus. "Did you expect him not to?" Remus pouted and looked at Logan. "Give me a ride?" "Why should I?" Logan asked, walking away. "Because you're the reason I'm stuck in the middle of buttfuck Missouri!" Logan just shrugged and pulled out his keys. Remus jogged his heels. He was not letting Logan leave without him, even if he had to wrestle him for those keys. However, they both stopped when they got to his car. "He slashed my tires!" Logan exclaimed, agape. "Did you expect him not to?" Remus asked pleasantly. "Truce," Logan said, rubbing at the bridge of his nose. Until we get back to civilization. A pair of handcuffs was dangling from the driver's side mirror. Remus plucked them off. Truce, he agreed with a sigh. And that's the end of Road Trips, Chicken Parmesan, and Handcuffs by Adriana in the Snow.